All right, so welcome to our lunch and learn for the day. Today's topic is pride, then and now. So first off, hello. My name's Morgan. I am part of the Planned Parenthood of the North Country Education and Engagement team. And then my fellow coworker is here as well. I'll let her introduce.
Hi, Nicole. I use she and her pronouns.
And then a little bit about what the team does is we do this monthly video or lunch and learn, as we call them, just to give tidbits of information about different topics. So next month is definitely going to be a different topic than what this month is. And then if you ever want to tune on later in the day, we also upload these to our YouTube channel as well. We also do engagement throughout our community. So at the end, you'll see all of our information if you want to get a hold of us as well. So learning objectives for today. Our first one is define pride celebrations and their purpose and goals. Number 2, identify the origins of pride celebrations. And then number 3, understand the evolution of pride over time. So we're going to touch on a lot of things today. Just bear with us. If you have any questions at any time, please raise your hands. So with every education that we do, we have group agreements. So throughout this presentation, we just want to stress confidentiality. So whatever you bring up stays in this group setting. So know that if you have anything that you want to speak to specifically to Nicole and I, you can send us a message privately as well. Then mutual respect. Everybody has different upbringings. Everybody has different knowledge levels. So we're just coming here together to really open up our minds, learn a little bit more about what pride is for everybody. So mutual respect when it comes to all of that. And then finally, open minds and open hearts. Like I'm saying, we're here today to learn a little bit more, something that we didn't touch on in the past, or just gain a little more knowledge about this topic specifically. All right.
Okay, so then we also always have to talk about, the language that we're planning on using for the session, and any terms that might be helpful to understand for today's lesson and just in real life, things you might not know. It might be helpful to understand following the presentation and just in real life. So a few things that are going to come up, definitely the acronym LGBTQIA+. Many folks have probably seen that in different ways and varieties, probably a lot this month being, Pride Month. So what this stands for is just an acronym for multiple gender identities and multiple sexual orientations. So a gender identity is one's innermost concept of self as either, male, female. It could be a blend of both, or it could be neither. There's all kinds of gender identities. In that acronym here, LGBTQIA only represents a few. So lesbian is one, gay is another. I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. The gender identities that are listed in the LGBTQIA acronym are transgender, queer. You could also potentially use questioning as a gender identity. So those ones are more specifically your gender identities. So as far as your sexual orientations, that is, defined as one's inherent or enduring emotional, physical, or romantic attraction to another person. So represented in the acronym is the sexual orientation of lesbian, gay, or bisexual. Again, queer could be used as either a gender identity or as a sexual orientation, and same with intersex. So as I've just mentioned, queer is an umbrella term that refers to a broad spectrum of sexual orientations and gender identities. So people can use that word to, describe themselves as either their gender orientation, their sexual orientation. Historically, queer has been a word that's been used as an insult meant to hurt other people or offend people. Um, so just understanding that we're using that word in a positive way and not a derogatory way when we're speaking about that today. And another thing, and another point to take home off of this slide is, sexual orientation does not determine someone's gender identity. So these are all separate parts of a person, and they're very complex parts. So we all as humans have all of these parts. And so this is just a very quick little lesson about that. So if you want more information, we're happy to provide more lessons about that. We do safe zone trainings for communities and for, different agencies. So of course, get a hold of us if you want more information about that. So that should be it for our little lesson today. We're also gave you a little guide here to some pride flags because, when we're talking about pride, you also see a lot of pride flags. So here is a handful of different pride flags that you might see. So there's a pride flag that started it all. So it has a pink stripe in it, and you don't always see that. So over time, things have changed a little bit. So these flags have changed. Different communities have also, come up with a flag to represent their community. Not one flag is correct. These are all correct. There's just different iterations that are out there for different reasons in different communities. So the 6-color pride flag you see all the time, the rainbow. The Philadelphia pride flag is important to mention because it adds the Black and brown stripes to also represent Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the conversation as well. We have transgender flag, we have the non-binary pride flag, we have the intersex flag, the flag for the asexual community, the bisexual flag, the pansexual flag, the flag for the lesbian community, the gay men pride flag, and the modern pride flag, which puts together the transgender flag, Philadelphia pride flag, and the 6-color pride flag all on one. So on the next slide, you'll see, our pride flags, might have started out just as a rainbow, but through the years, as you see here, Daniel Wasar or Kesar, I don't know how to pronounce that exactly, but instantly when they came out with their pride flag, the iconic 2018 Progress pride flag added the 5-striped chevron to the left side of the flag, representing the LGBTQ plus people of color in the trans community. So there it is represented there. So neither one is more correct. It just, adds more people to the conversation, adds more communities to the conversation. And one more click will show us 2021. Is this the most recent pride flag? This started out in the intersex community in UK, actually, an organization out there created and started circulating this flag. So it's gained some popularity on social media since. So yeah, these are just some representations of different pride flags you might see.
All right, so with a little bit of background on all the terms, we want to specifically state what is Pride. So during the month of June, Pride celebrations occur around the world to celebrate and uplift LGBTQIA plus identities and experiences. These events help with a sense of community and belonging among the LGBTQIA plus folks and their allies specifically. So it helps create visibility among the border communities. With that said, some Pride celebrations do occur in October. This is a recognition of LGBTQ plus History Month. And then also some campuses, like college campuses, do some Pride events during their fall semester with their students as well. So these are just some pictures about what Pride events occur all around the globe. So we have a picture of Berlin in Germany, Amsterdam, so the Netherlands, and Taiwan as well. So these Pride events can be taken anywhere, done anywhere. We also have local ones. These were some of the 2021 Pride events that we did locally in Lawville and Watertown. So pride is shown everywhere around the globe, like the last slide says. And then we also want to touch that it spans all across time and cultures. So to, like the slide says, the degree to which same-sex relations and identities were and are accepted and celebrated in different times, locations, and community. So you can find these in any history book. Israel, it kind of touches in the Bible. The Greece and Rome, there's a lot of mentions during their history, and the same as like European and colonial 21st century. So you're going to find different pop-ups of LGBTQIA plus events along the timeline. So we just want to make that clear. So the ones we're touching on today are big events, but not the only events. So June,
All right.
yeah, go for it.
June 28th, 1969. This is like the official start of what Pride really is. So we've kind of talked about, the background of Pride, what it looks like nowadays. So this is going to go through the history of Pride and where it started. And really where it started was on this day, June 28th, 1969. And it's called the Stonewall Riots is what it was famously called. So the very first Pride was not a celebration like we've been showing you. So this is afterwards, it became a celebration, but the first time was not. So in 1969, it was still a crime to have intimate partner relationships with people of the same sex. So bars and clubs emerged as havens for queer folks to live and act authentically. Unfortunately, queer patrons brought unwanted attention. So even in the decades leading up to the 1969 police raids, queer-friendly establishments were common by 1969 because, people, especially queer people, needed somewhere to go that was safe for them. Raids created opportunities for police to harass, arrest, and publicly shame patrons just for being who they are. So raids happened often. So the beginning of the Gay Liberation Movement, this is, another way of saying the start of the, when the Stonewall Riots happened, it was known as the beginning of the Gay Liberation Movement. So this is how it happened. In the late hours of June 28th, 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, which is the name of a club and bar in New York City's Greenwich Village. It's a neighborhood known to serve a diversity of LGBTQIA patrons. So in a late night show of force, police raided the Stonewall Inn, as they were raiding very often those establishments, but they raided the Stonewall Inn. And so while such raids were common on gay-friendly establishments, the events of June 28th represented a boiling over of anger and frustration within the queer community. They had enough of these raids and this mistreatment. So that night in June, patrons fought back. Overwhelmed and frustrated with persistent mistreatment and stigma, they had enough. People like Marsha Johnson, which is pictured on the left, and Sylvia Rivera is pictured on the right, are both examples of transgender women of color who patroned the Stonewall Inn that night and often. And they were at the forefront of that riot. They were said to, have thrown the first stone, so to speak. They were really at the forefront of that movement in the beginning of that fight. They became advocates and pioneers for the fight for LGBTQ plus rights.
All right. And then, like I said, Stonewall was not the first LGBTQ plus riot. Actually, 10 years earlier in Los Angeles, trans women of color also fought back against police harassment. What this event was at a Cooper Donuts, as you can see in this picture right here, May 1959. What happened here as well, police riots began and they started harassing BIPOC trans women. And what happened is people came out and started throwing donuts, coffee at the policemen, and a riot kind of stopped out and they had to shut down that area of the city actually for a whole entire day. So that is another one that happened 10 years earlier to the Stonewall, or the riots. And then, so after Stonewall, the beginning of the queer organizing. So 1970s, acting up. So the 1960s reflected a period in which LGBTQ plus Americans relied on civil disobedience and other forms of nonviolent protest in the pursuit of equality and rights. So nonviolent, so we're just doing signs, sit-ins, protests like that. In the 1970s, with little to show following years of nonviolent protests, LGBTQ plus Americans shifted tactics and engaged in more formal activism, often with a focus on diversity and intersectionality. So what this kind of looked like is the 1979 March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. So it's pictured right here. A lot more signage, not as aggressive as what those riots were before. Very organized group of people coming together.
Okay. So just following our timeline here, we're into the 1980s, so this is when the HIV and AIDS epidemic really, kind of exacerbated what happened with the LGBTQ community. So there's these peaceful, protests and things like that. But LGBTQ people were still not always being treated, fairly. They weren't always invited into many spaces. And the AIDS and HIV epidemic only made this more obvious, the mistreatment and the, just sheer difference that people, would look at them as. So what we have is back in 1981, we discovered a virus that causes AIDS. It's first identified, it's called human immunodeficiency virus. So we determined finally that HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. So we were able to find out what the virus was that causes AIDS. So why this is connected to the LGBTQ community is there is a lot of gay men most often that would contract AIDS and then have later complications and even die from AIDS. And we, as a population, didn't understand what was causing it, but we knew that it was happening in the gay men population. So once we discovered that the virus was HIV and how you can get it and how you couldn't get it, that was really important. But as you're seeing here, from 1981 to 1985, there was just still a lot of question and a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstandings. So that is, in 1985 is when the first HIV test became available. So information obviously was made more readily available for folks, especially President Reagan first acknowledging HIV helps allow folks to know that it's real and how to not get it, which is, safer sex practices, using condoms and such. But because people didn't know how to not get it, they weren't aware of that. So for years, there were folks that didn't know how to avoid HIV. And it is, a life-threatening illness. So, and then keep going to 1987, and that's when that first HIV treatment medication even becomes available. So from 1981 to 1987, those 6 years go by, and somebody could have come into contact with HIV without knowing it and contracted a lifelong illness with no way to treat it. So unfortunately, because it was so rampant in the gay men community, it wasn't seen as much of a, push to figure out what was going on. For having that long of a period of time go by, and this many people dying within that time, it was really an unfortunate and sad part of history that we weren't able to, find that treatment and get that available to more people sooner. So, and we'll fast forward to today, a little bit nicer, a little bit better news is that Now, because HIV treatment, we've been able to study it for years. If someone has HIV, they can take a medication. It's called PrEP. And if they take that every single day for the rest of their lives, once a day, they will remain at an undetectable amount of HIV in their body. And if they cannot have a detectable amount of HIV in their body, that means that they are not able to transmit it to another person, making it so that it's not such an epidemic, and making it so that if you have HIV, it is not a death sentence, where back in 1981, through up until 1987, it really was, because we knew nothing and we didn't have any treatments available. So it's a big change now that if you do end up with HIV, as long as you are on PrEP medication, you may not ever transmit the disease, and you may not ever, you can lead a very healthy life. So that is just a little bit of history on the HIV and AIDS epidemic. That is still going on. It's still very much an epidemic, but yeah. Okay, so now we have the 1990s and 2000s. So the biggest, kind of point that sticks out in the 90s and the 2000s is, TV and everything that emerges greatly. So emergence of gay and queer representation in the media with the growth of the internet. It created new venues for queer narratives to emerge and for queer people to create safe and supportive communities. So, with many different websites and different social media, there wasn't as many platforms as there is now, but people were able to find communities, to find like-minded people. However, usually accurate depictions of life as an LGBTQ person, whether that's good or bad, is still just not on popular primetime TV shows. We're not seeing a lot of, LGBTQ relationships represented as the main characters in most primetime television shows. Although, as the years go, from 1990 up until today, we see more and more and more, which is really great.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you. 50 years of Pride. So annual Pride celebrations are still important for visibility, awareness, giving back to the LGBTQ plus community, and displaying the strength and resilience in numbers. Obviously, there are a lot of people today still hosting big events such as Pitcher. In 2019, New York City hosted World Pride, recognizing 50 years of Pride celebrations. So it's 2001 now, so that was only 2 years ago, that the 50th anniversary of Pride becoming a celebration, and not like the riots that like it used to be. Amazing. But in 2020, the May 2019 murder of George Floyd in police custody reinvigorated calls for equity and equality for all people, particularly BIPOC and transgender, non-binary, queer Americans. So due to this event in history, we have now gone back to the activism and organizing events, not just Pride celebrations. It's back to what it started as coming forward and making change in the communities actually, and making our voices heard about what's happening and how we need to get back in line with our goals, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a big event happened, and now we are on the same path again to becoming more known in legislation, and all of those. Like in this slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the effort continues now. So LGBTQ plus advocacy. So the bathroom legislations, the anti-trans sports legislations that were popping up, exclusive healthcare for legislations, adding to the equal rights amendments, and even federal court happening about all these topics. Yeah.
Basically, these legislations have been happening throughout time, but like you see a lot more of like the bathroom legislation, the anti-transports, and because we're online and on the internet too, we're all, you know, talking and having discussions about, you know, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. There is just a lot of that advocacy that's able to happen now too. So if anyone ever wants to get involved, this is, you know, the type of advocacy that we like to get involved in. You know, especially locally, it's always a great idea to try to get involved, you know, with those efforts, to try to show that there is support for LGBTQ folks in all areas of the world. So yeah, legislation just helps with that. So we always got to push for that for sure.
All right. And then settling on why pride. So pride continues to promote visibility and acceptance, like we've been saying throughout this whole presentation, in society that still excludes queer lives and experiences. For a good quote, we put in, among those of us who share the goals of liberation and workable future for our children, there can be no hierarchy of oppression. And I think that just kind of wraps up this presentation on an amazing note, because that is what we're fighting for this LGBTQIA plus and BIPOC, everything. It's just women in general, the Equal Rights Amendment, it all just brings it back to that. We're working for a better future for our families, our children, that they can live the best life that they want and feel comfortable being who they are. So we want to say thank you for coming and listening today. Hopefully you took something away from what we've talked about. If there's any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Nicole and I. We have our joint email on there, as well as our phone numbers to reach out, and as well as our Instagram and Facebook. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next month, it'll be the same time, Wednesday, 12:30, end of the month. We'll have another topic to talk to you about. Please reach out in the meantime if you have any questions. Thank you.
Have a nice day.